welcome to our feature session on the report of Redesign Our Future, the title of the new report prepared by Ban Ki-moon Foundation for a Better Future. And as you all know, sustainable development was adopted in 1992 in Rio Earth Summit. It has been already a long time ago, almost 30 years after the adoption of sustainable development concept. And the world community adopted another SDG, which is a sustainable development goal, in 2015. And it's already 5 years have passed already since the adoption of the SDG. And it is only 10 years left until we complete our journey to achieve SDG by 2030. So it is very timely for all of us to think about how much progress have we made and what are the lessons and how we can accelerate our effort to achieve the SDG by 2030. This is the main purpose of the report prepared by Ban Ki-moon Foundation for a Better Future. So it is a great pleasure for all of us to present the contents of the report and have very interesting discussions by inviting world-renowned experts on sustainable development goals. So without much ado, I'd like to invite Professor Chung Tae-young to give us the presentation on the report. Professor Chung, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador Chung. It's my great honor to have a chance to make a presentation on this report. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning to everyone who are joining to this online meeting. The redesigning of our future, the UN SDGs 5 years and the next 10 years, as the moderator said, this was done by the Ban Ki-moon Foundation for a Better Future last year. As a flagship project of the foundation, we did a lot last year, and then it's great honor to make a short presentation on the core messages and the findings of this report. Well, I'm a professor in this school, and also I'm the director of the Sustainable Development Program of the foundation. That's why I think I have a chance to make a short presentation. Well, before I start, if you have interest in the full version of this report, please visit the Ban Ki-moon Foundation for a Better Future. If you go there, then you can easily download the full report of this one in the form of PDF. So today, in this session, let me just highlight what we have found. I think we end up drawing these 6 important key messages to push this SDG agenda for next 10 years. As you all know, this one started from 2015 to 2030, so that it's the right time to review what we have done and what's missing and what we have to do for the next 10 years. I think that's the objective of this report. And let me summarize the report first before my presentation. Well, I think our key findings and our messages to the world was clear. First, SDGs, as you all know, there are 17 goals, and which were well designed, but our observation for last 5-year performance of the world was not really good in terms of the interactions among SDGs. So we clearly said that, okay, look, the redesigning, realigning of those 17 important SDG goals and define the interactions, channels, and ways. I think that's our first message. Second, at the beginning, we didn't really touch this issue, but when we started this project in the foundation, well, as you all know, the COVID-19 last for more than years, and that's why we are doing this forum in this format. Well, so we have to find a way how to assess the impact of COVID-19 to the global community, including our responding strategies and so on related to SDG goals. So we add this new topic, issue, assessing the COVID-19 and its implication on the SDG. That was one of the key messages that we draw from this project. The third one, I think the third one is one of the important, the issue, the rebalancing among the SDG stakeholders. As you know, there are many, many players in achieving the SDGs. So how to achieve the balance among those stakeholders, I think that's one of the key issues that we have been discussed, and I'll talk about that issue a little bit. And the fourth message is obviously that's very much related to this forum also. The Yonsei University Institute for the Engagement and Empowerment, and every year we hold this global GEEF, Global Engagement and Empowerment Forum. So one of the key message of SDG is how to empower the people and how to engage the stakeholders to achieve our SDG goal. I think that's one of the key messages we draw. And the fifth one, as you can see from the title, this is a redesign of our future, the UN SDG 5 years and the next 10 years. So how are we going to look back the 5 years? So we need the framework to monitor and evaluate our SDG performance. So that's why in our title we put the 5-year, and the implication of this 5-year review include this monitoring and evaluating mechanism or framework or system, whatever, to achieve the next 10 years the performance. And finally, I think the last message that we want to draw, we want to share with the global community is sharing our experiences. You know, I don't know the Korea is good or bad. I think that will be done by one of our panelists from Ministry of Environment, the Director Jung. But that's the Korean experience of achieving SDGs. And one of our panelists from Japan, I'm sure he will share Japanese experience, right? So I think how to share the experience and how to improve or enhance our understanding and our, performing the SDG-related practice, including policies and private sector's activity. So the important message to the world from the Ban Ki-moon Foundation is that, let's share our experience. So those are the key 6 the messages we draw from this report. Let me talk a little bit more in details. But sizing up the challenges. I think this is our designing of our project, and there are 6 the messages, and we line up that on. It's like a rainbow, but I think the overall the goal is how to redesign our future under the framework of SDG. Okay, so realigning the interaction among SDGs, and our finding, our observation is simple. SDG goals, those 17 SDG goals are not interactive and are not effectively along with other goals. I think that's our findings. So lack of understanding the interaction among those 17 goals, and sometimes misunderstanding of the goal itself, and lack of analysis on the interaction among the 3 pillars. And as you know, the SDG 3 pillar means, people, prosperity, and planet. So these 3P interactions and the analysis are not yet fully included in our practice or in our policy-making process. That's why we draw the conclusion saying that, we have to realign, especially interaction-related issues. So, for example, let's see, this is done by Sustainable Development Solution Network. That's Professor Jeffrey Sachs in Columbia University is leading this one. And obviously, the former UN Secretary General, Mr. Ban, he fully supported this SDSN. So their findings, based on their research in 2019, they said among those, I don't know how many countries in the world, let's say 200 countries. And among those 200 countries, the high-level statement on SDG, how many countries say yes? Only 33. And what about to implement the SDG, how many countries are really considering the budget allocation to achieve this SDG goal? Only 18 countries, among those 200 countries. And national monitoring, how many countries are really doing? Less than 30 countries. And stakeholder engagement, at best, this is the best. And only 35 countries say yes. This is based on SDSN's survey. And this is a reality. This is our 5 years performance. So is it good enough? The answer is obviously no. The 200 countries and the global communities SDG performance for last 5 years, definitely no. Then how are we going to improve it? That's why we give the very strong message at the beginning. We say realigning the interaction among the SDGs. And obviously, based on that, the recommendation is identifying the conditions and policy options that could maximize the win-win synergy and while minimizing the trade-off among the SDGs. SDGs, if you look at the SDG 17 goals, it's seemingly like something conflicted. Or if you achieve one goal, the other goal can be inevitably minimized. It's kind of a trade-off phenomena you can observe. But I think our message, our recommendation is identifying some enabling condition to maximize the synergies among those SDG goals. I think that's very strong recommendation we want to draw, and also establish the SDG designated authority within the government system. For example, here in Korea, Ministry of Environment is in charge of this SDG performance and SDG related policy development. So we ask if some countries, they don't have those governance or government bodies, then we strongly recommend that you have to establish the authority to check the SDGs. And investment and social and environmental related sectors. And nowadays, I think fortunately, many private sectors are now engaging more. They allocate their resources more in environment and social related issues, and we call that the ESG. I think so. Nowadays, ESG related financial resources are including. So I think this is also very important. The movement, the steps. So our recommendation is basically to improve the interaction among the SDGs. We have to do such 3-4 recommendations. And second one, that's the assessment of the COVID-19 response and its implication to SDGs. And it's obvious, right? Among those SDG 17 goals, SDG goal number 3 is about the health related. And COVID-19 means direct damage or impact to human health from the virus. So COVID-19 response means basically how to improve how to achieve our SDG goal number 3. That's directly related. So we can see from this WHO's report that SDG goal number 3 is directly related to COVID-19 response. And the recommendation, well, our recommendation is basically two things. I think immediate response to COVID-19, that requires a lot of the reforming on public health related things. But in the long run, once this COVID-19 wave is more or less passed, then I think each single government, they have to think about how to develop the long-term response to another type of COVID. So we requires long-term and then short-term combined harmonized response, and obviously that should be linked with SDG goals. Because if you see the 17 SDG goals, all are interacted and all are related. So if we, the human beings and human society, keep destroying our environment, that's related SDG goal, I don't know, 13 plus. I think if we keep destroying our environment, then for the next round, it returns back to the severe damage to human systems, including the human being itself. Then that SDG goal number 3 will be definitely affected. SDG goal number 1, 2, and those are human-related SDGs are affected. So SDG goals are very much important to develop the response to COVID-19 type of human disaster. And the rebalancing thing, I think this is one of the key points and key messages that we draw. So far, the findings are obviously SDG goals. To achieve those goals, it was not balanced, and I don't want to read these details. Basically, public sector driven and very much short-term policies, and those are the SDG things. But SDG is really the left-hand side graph is the current SDG practice. Very much heavy-weighted on the public sector, and the private sector and civil sectors are very much lightly involved, and they're very much short-sighted, myopic type of policy development, and that's the current situation in most countries. So to achieve this rebalance among the SDGs, we need basically paradigm shift. Paradigm shift means, well, to achieve some kind of a balancing sense between public sector and the private sector, and also civil society. And rather than the short-term, very short-run based policy or practice, we have to think about a little bit long-term, long-term vision. One example is like this. We have we keep talking about the climate change issue for a long time, but very recently, many countries, I think more than 100 countries, now, wait a minute, I think the climate change is not really short-run issue, so let's think about a little bit long-term issue. That's I think, carbon neutrality 2050, so that's even 2050 is 30 years later from now on. So government start thinking about this long-term target, long-term vision. That's one of the process of rebalancing among those SDG goals and the stakeholders. And empowerment and engagement, the stakeholders, I think, this one, bottom-up approach is not feasible. That's our findings. But the details, I think Professor Kwok next to me, when she has the floor, I think she'll cover this one more. So I'll skip this one because I don't want to spend too much time. And recommendation is public sector, private sectors, and we need the guidelines and so on and so forth. So details will be done by the Professor Kwak, I hope. And I think the framework is done by Professor Kwak. So I think I'll pass this one to her. And monitoring and evaluation, I think this one is one of the important message that we draw, because without monitoring, without evaluating performance, we cannot really talk about the next 10 years. So we review very rigorously what we have done. And then based on our evaluation, we're going to improve our performance. We're going to reform. We're going to change something. So to achieve the SDG goal by 2030, we definitely need this monitoring and evaluation system. Now I think they have monitoring and evaluation system, but the problem is it's not harmonized, it's not unified, it's not consistent, and so on. So we need something, the common monitoring, evaluating the framework. That's the message and our recommendation. And finally, sharing the experience. As I said at the beginning, before the Biden was elected, the last 3-4 years world, if you see that, then this photo symbolically tell us what we have done in the world last 4-5 years. Yeah. G2, the big giant, America and China, they don't really work together. They didn't. They just blame each other for every single the global issues. And to achieve these global SDG goals, I think we have to make them to face each other rather than what you can see from the photo. So sharing the experience among the stakeholders, I think that's very much important, the message that we draw. Well, I think I take too much of time, so thank you for your attention, and let me stop at this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Jung Tae-yong, for rundown on the key messages of the report. Now I'd like to invite Professor Kwak Ju-young, the professor of School of Business at Yonsei University. Actually, she was one of the co-authors of the report, and she might be focusing on engagement and empowering the stakeholders. Yeah, the floor is yours, Professor Kwak.
Hello. My name is Ju-young Kwak. I am working at School of Business. So perhaps I will focus on the corporate issues and the international realm for the Sustainable Development Goal related issues. So again, to emphasize the importance of Sustainable Development Goals set by UN, it's so timely action to check the progress and discuss the direction of SDG for the next 10 years. So it has been 5 years, and there are 10 years more that they are waiting. So how to do and what has been done? It's timely to check because it's under COVID-19. So it's a pandemic crisis. And as a it's kind of inevitable choice because the people need to isolate for fear of being infected. So the recent crisis is that the use of plastics has increased really sharply. So what we have done in the global crisis, we definitely need to discuss it. And many people have lost a job, even now. So emphasizing long-term benefits sometimes do not really appeal to the suffering people. So under the situation, what should we do? So we definitely need to discuss about it too. So the Professor Jung also introduced some slides about empowering and engaging stakeholders for the SDG goals, and we have already uploaded the full paper at Ban Ki-moon Foundation for a Better Future, the homepage. So please check the paper, and I don't have to repeat the picture or the wording again, but I know we have the generic audience as well as professional audience, but in order to enhance or remind the importance of SDG again, for the generic audience, let me introduce briefly about the ESG. So the rebalancing the power, I don't say the state sector should be reduced. Rather, I would like to emphasize again the private sector should be more active and participating in SDGs. However, private organizations, say firms, they are organizations for interest. So without profits, the organizations go disband or get out of the market. So profitability itself is a critical goal. And usually the corporate budgeting is done yearly, so that if the firms can't make a profit, they can't share any, they can't be in the situation to think more about the SDG. So the SDG, in order to boost up continuously the corporate participation for SDG, the corporate, first of all, should be sustainably profitable, so that in fact, the corporate sectors have some, the strong limitation and the constraints. Under the situation, perhaps an ESG framework will be an alternative, but very, very optimal solution. So ESG, environment, social, and governance framework, have 3 pillars. Environment, everybody related to the corporate activity should protect the environment. And the social, the firms should contribute to the society. And of course, the insiders, employees, and all the management, top management, middle management, they are important part of the actors to do the SDG activities. So that ESG, of course, at the firm level, firms have conducted the corporate social responsibility, the so-called CSR. Okay? CSR is already common. However, as the name tells, the responsibility. So that the ESG is compared to CSR, in my opinion, it's kind of an evolution because it includes investors. The communication with investors, it should be more widely adopted. And all of us know that environment should be protected by firms in a way that their businesses continue and the corporate governance should improve. And we need more firms definitely to adopt the ESG framework at the global level to communicate about how a firm should contribute to sustainable development with the stakeholders. And non-stakeholders also watch and monitor whether the covenant is kept as well. So in fact, in the paper, report, I coined the term, the covenant. I really like the term. So it's a kind of the public promise for a firm to offer to the important stakeholders. And it is quite comprehensive. So it's environment, society, and the governance. Another comment is the role of international organization. So the SDG is set by UN, so it's UN's contribution to the global community. So in the current ESG framework, the role of international organizations somehow do not appear crucially because the ESG is mainly discussed within the domestic context. Although the international organizations are a main part of the ESG activities. And including United Nations, the global organizations are a large hierarchy, network. And as always, it's large and it's wide, global, so that even though all international organizations have code of ethics and the ESG related performance criteria, because they are very large, it's practically hard to real time have feedback from what is being happened. Okay? So that perhaps my suggestion while I was writing that report and meeting the people working at international organization is that the evaluation cycle should be shorter so that international organizations are also more actively participate in the SDG implementation of the SDG. Okay? And in addition to the role of international organizations, as Professor Chung has emphasized, the global sharing for the SDG experience is very important. Some countries are running ahead in development and implementation of SDG-related activities, while other countries are slow. Why slow? Perhaps the lack of expertise or the broken balance in the SDG stakeholders are varying reasons. Regardless of the roots for the reason, we need more evidence, more best practices, and demonstrations to the SDG policies optimized under the setting of each stakeholder. So that perhaps that's the end of my comment. So I have discussed about the corporate sector, the issues on the corporate sector and the international community. And if all of these efforts are continuously pushed, perhaps we will have a better picture in the last ending year of the SDG 10 years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Kwak Ju-young. Now I'd like to invite Professor Park Tae-in, the professor of Seoul National University. He was also one of the co-author of the report, and I think Professor Park might be focusing on monitoring and evaluation, but you can add something else as well. Yeah, so Professor Park, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ambassador Chung. To add on Professor Chung's keynote presentation, I would like to offer a few points. First, I'd like to re-emphasize the importance of voluntary national reviews. Second, it would be also relevant to share with the audiences some up-to-date information about the latest VNLs in 2020. Third, let me conclude by introducing two courses on sustainable development for our youth audiences. The 2030 Agenda encourages UN member states to conduct regular and inclusive reviews of progress at the national and sub-national levels, which are voluntary and state-led, undertaken by both developing and developed countries. So these national reviews are expected to serve as a basis for the regular reviews by the high-level political forum on sustainable development. This is a meeting under the auspices of the UN Economic and Social Council. So it is quite obvious that the VNLs are the only means to investigate formally the implementation of SDGs by UN member states. So in order for the high-level political forum, HLPF, to function as a central platform and an effective place to follow up and review the SDGs and to address the global sustainable development governance deficit, qualitative and quantitative development of the VNLs is very critical. So last year, 47 UN member states presented their VNLs, and this brings the total number of VNLs, number of countries who have presented their VNL reports to 168 since its adoption of the Global Goals 2030 Agenda. So in their VNL report, it is quite predictable that many countries expressed deep concern about the effect of COVID-19 on their society and economy. In other words, on their people and prosperity. So this included the impact on national budgets and the agile need to redirect existing expenditures towards emergency responses. In our issue papers, I and my co-authors advise that there should be a standard requirement for all UN member states to integrate SDGs into their national budgetary processes, because national budgets are the link between sustainable development plans and strategies and their actual outcomes, I mean the public spending. However, today with the COVID-19 pandemic, many of the hard-earned gains towards SDGs are in trouble, they are in jeopardy, and the strain on budgetary processes triggered by the pandemic underline the need for building better national capacities for SDG-related budgeting. Having said this, in this era of pandemic, it is very exciting and very impressive to see that the majority of our audiences are young generations from all over the world. I don't want to believe that it's because of Ms. Angelina Jolie, but speaking of higher education for sustainable development, And SDG engaged university education is critical for achieving the global goals and redesigning our future. In this regard, as mentioned earlier, let me introduce two courses on sustainable development for our youth audiences. Before I moved to Seoul National University, I was a research professor at the Institute for Global Engagement and Empowerment at Yonsei University, where I was involved in managing the two courses and also as well as the first and the second GEEF. First of all, understanding sustainable development with Ban Ki-moon is a flagship undergraduate course to increase students' understanding of the theories and practices of sustainable development. In my recent published article, based on a questionnaire survey during the course, there were significant average differences in the perception of sustainable development and the measure of global civic awareness, depending on whether or not to participate in sustainable development education. Aside from this course available to Yonsei students, IGE developed special Coursera course. It's called Sustainable Development in the 21st Century with Ban Ki-moon, open to the public. And you can easily find this course at the Coursera website, and it's free. The world will have the largest youth population ever over the next few years, so young people out of sustainable development make no sense. It is impossible. So I do hope more and more youth engagement sessions will be organized at the upcoming GEEF, several GEEF events in the near future. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Park. Now I'd like to invite the Director Jung Eun-hye from the Ministry of Environment. She is in charge of green transformation policy. Now, floor is yours.
Thanks for the introduction. I'm very honored to participate in this very prestigious forum as a panelist. I feel very close to the GEEF because I had organized a session at the first GEEF when I worked for the United Nations Office for Sustainable Development, which is a part of the UN DESA. Actually, I have a presentation, but for my second intervention, so my intervention will be very short. First of all, the GEF has been a really great venue to share the ideas and practices on the SDGs implementation with the global community. And I congratulate the launch of the Redesign Our Future, the report, which is very important, and it provides excellent analysis on the current status and challenges of the SDGs implementation, and very concrete and solid recommendation. One of the things that I liked about the report is that it also suggests the 2050 Summit for Sustainable Development Goals. As Professor Park mentioned, that the UN has high-level political forum, and we have 4 years. Every 4 years we have the summit level session, but I think it's not enough. To mobilize political will, we need something more. So at the 2050 summit will be an excellent opportunity. My second point is also related to the comments by Professor Park. One of the reports, the main recommendation is rebalancing among SDG stakeholders and empowering and engaging the stakeholders, especially for the young people. The concept of the sustainable development itself is about the intergenerational equity. So the participation of the young people is the essential for the implementation of sustainable development goals. But it is easier said than done. We provide lots of courses and we provide the opportunity to engage the young people to join the discussion. But let me just share one of the experiences that I had last year. My division, Green Transformation Policy Division, is coordinating the sustainable development policy in Korea, in the government. And last year, I tried to, the Sustainable Development Committee members, we are making new SD committee member. And I'd like to try to have some members, committee members, under 30. But the Sustainable Development Law has a specific, requirement. The committee member should have a lot of experience and expertise. So I couldn't find the person who has a lot of expertise and the experience who are under 30. So that is just one of the examples how difficult it is to make the voice of the young people to be heard and reflected. And that's one of my intervention. Thank you.
Okay, Director Jung. And now it's time to invite our foreign panelists. First, I'd like to invite Bernard Woods from ADB, Asia Development Bank. He is a Director of Strategy and Planning Department. I welcome you for joining our session. And now the floor is yours, Director Woods.
Great. Thank you very much, Ambassador Chung, and good day to everybody. So I have great congratulations to pass on to Professor Jung and the team for this report. I'd like to react to it focusing on 5 different aspects of the report, which I think resonate very much with how the Asian Development Bank also sees the SDGs. So first, as you said, the kind of interactions amongst the SDGs, COVID-19 and implications for the SDGs, rebalancing stakeholders, and here I'll pick up some comments from Professor Taeyeon Park about ESG. Monitoring and evaluation, other Professor Park also mentioned that, and then finally with working together. So maybe first just to say that from the research we've done with the SDGs, all of the SDGs were off track for achievement even before COVID-19. So when we think about the interactions and the trade-offs amongst the SDGs, which I fully agree hasn't been given enough attention, it wasn't like we were ahead in some and then trading off those against others. We were behind on all of the SDGs in Asia and the Pacific. And our perspective is if Asia and the Pacific doesn't achieve the SDGs, then globally we can't achieve them. So absolutely on the kind of the first point in the report, we very much think that there needs to be more thought on the interactions, the trade-offs with the SDGs, but underlying that is that they're all off track. And now once we get the data from COVID-19 and the effect on the SDGs, likely that they will be even more off track. So the second topic I'd like to pick up from the report is really the implications of COVID-19 for the SDGs. And I think the crisis has shown globally, but also in Asia and the Pacific, really how our failures on the SDGs have made this global pandemic even worse. So I think COVID-19 would have been a global crisis regardless, but I think, for example, if you look at SDG 1 and 10 around social protection systems, I think clearly there have been challenges there, and had we had more robust social protection systems that would have been better, those would have been better able to support populations during lockdowns and movement restrictions. Zero hunger, I know we can clearly see that the COVID-19 pandemic has interrupted agriculture, it's interrupted supply chains, moving foodstuffs around the world, and this will have a very detrimental effect on zero hunger. And then Professor Jung, you mentioned, of course, SDG 3. So this is where the most damage, the most impact of COVID-19 will be felt on the SDGs directly. But also we can see, had we done a better job, had we had more robust universal healthcare, had we had better systems to track and monitor and address communicable disease, I think we'd be in a much better place in terms of fighting back against the COVID-19 pandemic. So across the SDGs, a definite deep and lasting impacts will be felt from COVID-19. And I think that has exposed the weaknesses and the gaps in our SDG implementation. So we see very much the SDGs as the framework for building back better, for charting our pathway to recovery. And we very much would look forward to working with other partners like yourselves on both understanding better the impact of COVID-19 on the SDGs, and also how we can use the SDGs as a framework for a green and resilient future moving forwards. So the next topic, and this is about rebalancing stakeholders, which you mentioned. And we see a real need to place the emphasis on the private sector. In our Asian Development Bank, this is an area of increasing focus, and Professor Tae Park, you mentioned about ESG. We really see the explosion in interest in ESG. This is very positive. And the way we would see it is to move beyond corporate social responsibility, so that the actual kind of for-profit actions of the private sector are ones which bring about progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. So to do this, we're setting up a new partnership with the private sector called ADB Ventures, and this is basically about investing in technology for the SDGs. There is a Korean involvement in this, in addition to Nordic involvement and others. And basically, we're looking at technology-driven companies, investing in them that have a potential for larger scale impact. And our intent is to crowd in around $1 billion of risk capital, really using robust ESG principles and adhering to very ambitious impact metrics. So in terms of rebalancing stakeholders, our focus is very much on the private sector. Professor Park, you mentioned the VNR's monitoring evaluation, very important. And for us, looking at this, we're focusing on something called SDG implementation snapshots. So this we've done in a number of countries. We've partnered with Columbia University, SDSN, which was mentioned earlier. And this is basically looking at some of the topics that came out in their survey, Professor Jung, that you mentioned earlier. So looking at the architecture in the countries, is that set up for SDG implementation? Is there something under the Office of the President or a ministry handling SDGs? Is our SDGs integrated into the planning and budget? Is the sufficient financing? How are countries raising money to achieve the SDGs? And finally, do they have the systems in place to collect the data and measure performance on the SDGs? So we've done a number of these snapshots in countries across Asia and the Pacific, and this is something we'd like to expand, again, to get a better sense of how countries are actually moving forwards on the SDGs. Also with partnership, we think partnership is very important. Ours really centered on the United Nations, so working with UNSCAP, the Economic Commission for Asia and the Pacific, and also the United Nations Development Program, UNDP, really monitoring the progress of the SDGs in the Asia and the Pacific region. And so we think that the partnerships, especially with the UN, are really important moving forwards. Maybe let me end by summing up that for us, it's really important to learn from the first 5 years of experience as we look forward to the kind of final decade for action to really to make strides on achieving the SDGs. And in this context, we're one of many actually multilateral development banks. And we've recently put out the first joint MDB report on the SDGs, and really seeing how the SDGs can be this platform for moving to a green, inclusive, and resilient recovery. So we very much congratulate you on the report. Many of the themes are things that we at the Asian Development Bank are also working on, and look forward to future collaboration on some of those. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Director Woods. Thank you very much for your comment on the report. Now I'd like to invite Dr. Fujino, Junichi Fujino from IGS. He is a program director from Japan. So Fujino-san, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ambassador Rekon-chan, and all the panelists. I'm glad to join this event even over this online system. It's a COVID-19 era. It's quite important to launch this Redesign Our Future report. Congratulations, because our UN report touching on SDGs, it's the name of report document is Transforming Our World. And then how to transform our world, we need to redesign our future. So it's a quite important title. I just also publish a kind of a report how to tackle with COVID-19 from the perspective of especially environmental issues. We launched its triple R framework, react, recover, and redesign. So first we need to react to the current situation. Now vaccine is now available and starting available, but it is how to having now it's also discussed about the recovery. About Japan, when we have COVID-19, we somehow having the very urgent action, but enough. We would like we include kind of the action like renewable energy or like kind of SDGs action to tackle with the COVID-19. So then we have now kind of integrated approaches for COVID-19 and also environment or SDGs issues. But when I look back at the Japanese 5 years experience, Japanese government set the SDGs national level headquarters in 2016 before the G8 Japan. I feel that in 2016 or 2017 only kind of the expert or only the people who have mind has interest in SDGs. So there is not so many kind of movement, but from 2018, for example, Japanese government started the SDGs Future City program. So government set the front runner SDG city, 30 cities every year from 2018. And now Japanese government select 19 SDGs front runner cities. And this kind of movement makes the SDGs much popular. Of course, business side, all the panelists mentioned like ESG or now every major company interested in TCFD or like such as the rating system or the reviewing system. These kind of not totally private public system makes the business more like SDGs friendly. This is quite interesting movement. And then I might mainly the guy who is in field in climate change, like Professor Tae Yeon-jung. I joined the first COP 11 in Montreal in 2005, and so it's around 16 years ago. When I joined the first COP 11, only the national governments and quite a limited number of the experts like science or a few business side joined the COP meeting. But now, like COP 21 Paris or for COP26, UK now there is a lot of movement for like non-state actors, like Race to Zero. Also, national government last climate summit to China announced the zero carbon by 2060, and then recently, Korea, Japan also announced zero carbon by 2050. So these kind of movement are quite important to push the SDGs from the side of climate, but also from climate side, SDGs is quite important because the, we need the like economic and then social benefit through the climate action. So this kind of movement is quite important. Also, I'd like to point it out the like technology or solution side. When I discuss about the climate change at the, in the COP15, Copenhagen, there is a moment that is, we almost have the Copenhagen protocol, but it failed. And then when I look back at the situation, we may still miss the like good technology, like renewable energy or like IT or nowadays AI. It's still not matured at that time, but now, you know, many like renewable energy has good economic impact, and then like US, like local level, there are many initiatives towards zero carbon or SDGs, especially like Los Angeles, California, New York, or many states. I heard that now more than 200 cities in US announced that it's zero carbon by before 2050. So like last 5 years, we have such a good momentum, but what will be happen for next 10 years? This is also quite important, and then we really need kind of such integrated approach, and then we need a better solution. So this is my first comment. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Fujino-san. So now I think I'd like to open the floor, and before we engage in some of the discussions among the panelists, I have received, I think we should exhaust some of the questions we received from the audience. We have already prepared questions from the audience, and one of the general questions from the audience was, what are some early learnings we could use and adapt from this health crisis to work on solving climate change crisis? Has the pandemic reshaped actions and ideas over how to achieve the SDG to minimize the negative effects of climate change in the future? In other words, the question is about what kind of lessons we can apply through the pandemic to climate change actions. So I'd like to open the floor to our panelists and the presenters. Do you have any specific comments on this question? What kind of lessons we can learn from the pandemic that can be applied in combating climate change actions? So who would like to volunteer? Any volunteers? Professor Jung Tae-yong, you would like to go first? I think you
Well, Bernard, I think why don't you go ahead? I think.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Wood, you go first.
Oh, great, thank you very much. Really excellent question, and the way that we think about this is, you know, we all see the damage and the very destructive nature of COVID-19, but climate change promises to be much worse. So I think it's a very excellent question that we need to learn about this. I would make two comments. The first is we've seen, in my eyes, an amazing, what I would call a kind of pandemic green shift. So in the short space of 12 months or so, we've seen this real shift globally to an increased emphasis on clean energy and clean technology. And I think this is unprecedented and quite unpredicted. I mean, who would have thought that we'd be discussing fossil fuels as potentially stranded assets? And this has happened very quickly. So I think that's comforting. I'm not 100% sure what the correlation with the pandemic is, but it certainly brought that out. The second, I think, is the need for strong multilateral institutions and a strong sense of multilateralism and the global community. I think like the COVID-19 pandemic, climate change is something that we can only solve as a global community. We all have to do our part. All of our different countries have to take steps, but really we have to come together. And I think the COVID-19 has shown, where multilateralism is strong, we can work well, but it's also shown where there's weakness and where multilateral systems haven't worked well or haven't been supported, it's caused a lot of problems. And I think those problems are bad for COVID-19. I think they would be and will be even worse for climate change if we don't solve them. So I think really coming out of this, a focus on regional cooperation, integration, stronger multilateralism is something that we can learn from COVID-19 to climate change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wood. How about Fujino-san? You raised your hands, right? Yeah, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. The Kon-chan-san. Yes, there is several lessons from the COVID-19 to the climate change. Even the COVID-19 time, we have also climate risk or also climate damage. So now in the case of Fukushima, there was the typhoon in 2019, but before COVID-19, and then it makes the awareness of the climate. Also, COVID makes much bigger. So then they set the target renewable 100% by 2040, and then now there is the largest scale of the PV in Fukushima. So how we'd like to make such risk to the chance, and then now we have technology, and if we have good framework system, also incentives and then support, we can make such a big movement. So we need such a good challenge. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Fujino-san. Now, Professor Jung Tae-ho. Yeah.
Well, since the Wood, the ADB director, mentioned what I want to say, so I have to. I 100% agree with you, and I basically echo what you said. But since I'm in school, I'm in academia, let me add a little bit new concept. I think for a long time in international environmental the community, the people keep saying about the global commons, and now this pandemic and climate change, for a long time we thought that that's one of the typical example of global public good. So this is what government has to do, and this is what international agencies they have to deal with. But let's change. I think while we are overcoming this COVID-19, I think it's not the global public good. It's a global common good. So it's not the responsibility of a public sector only. I think the private sector and international agency. So maybe I think it's about time to redefine the global issues that we have to deal with. In the very short run, we have to obviously overcome this COVID-19, but in the long run, such global commons like climate change or ecosystems, and those issues should be dealt with the participation or engaging of all stakeholders, not just the public sector, domestically, nationally, internationally. Well, I think this is our common issue. So once we redefine our issue as global commons, then I think our approaches could be more integrated. That's an additional comment that I want to make. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Now, Professor Kwak Jung, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I have a very short follow-up to Professor Jung. So the pandemic necessitates it has sharply increased the public notion for the need of developing the alternative materials, say eco-friendly materials. And previously, let's say before pandemic, the COVID-19, so we kept saying that your future will be threatened unless you are acting for SDG right now. But most people, unless they are directly related, this is somebody else's story. But right now, along with the pandemic, people's stress level has increased really a lot compared to the past. So that this is the right timing to act for the SDG. That's my comment.
Any other comment from our panelists? Professor, you don't have? Okay. Then can I ask to Director Jong In-hye about the issue of, because you are from the Environment Ministry, you are in charge of engaging the Korean private sector industry as well. And what we heard from our panelists about the upside and the positive side about the impact of a pandemic on our response to climate change. But there are some concerns as well that while the governments and the private sector, they are very anxious to speed up the recovery, and they want to accelerate economic growth. And the private sector is anxious, and they would like to accelerate their business activities as well. There's a strong risk. The private sector doesn't care about the environmental impact, and they just only focus on short-term profitability and maximizing and accelerating economic growth and business. So from the Environment Ministry, Director Jong, how can you persuade and engage Korean private sector in spite of the negative impact on business from the pandemic to accept more green transformation for our future in spite of the economic depression, negative damage on their business activity on private sector? How can you persuade them to join and resist the temptation to go down the road of accelerating the economic growth at the expense of environment?
Ambassador Jung, thanks for the good one excellent question. Actually, I made a short presentation about the Korea's policy on the Green Recovery Plan, which is Green New Deal. So let me just share some slides with you. So I only have like the 7 or 8 minutes, so I will skip most of the slides and focus a few the important ones. I think the Fujino-san mentioned about we are living in the era of pandemics. The Thomas Friedman also said that, and because of the COVID-19 crisis is a result of ongoing climate change and the degradation of natural ecosystem. So we will see another pandemics to come. UNDESA made a projection of the global economy and the carbon emission grow after COVID-19. And they emphasized the importance of reducing carbon emission while delivering all the sustainable development goals through greener, more inclusive, and sustainable recovery. I think the Korean New Deal aims for, especially the Green New Deal, aims for this greener, more inclusive, and sustainable recovery. It envisions the national transformation toward a low-carbon economy and social inclusiveness. I'd like to just skip these slides, and I accept that Korea's effort on the Sustainable Development Goals implementation KSDGs is a modified form of UN SDGs, covering the 17 goals, 119 targets, and I just skipped this part, 119 targets and 236 indicators. It is established through multi-stakeholder consultation. And I will just skip that part. The Green New Deal, affects, on the preliminary analysis shows that the Korea's Green New Deal has a lot of impacts on the Sustainable Development Goals implementation. Let me share a few the pillars of the Korea's Green New Deal policy. First pillar is sustainable infrastructure and nature restoration, and it has a lot of impacts on the water goal, energy goal, city, sustainable consumption and production, climate change, and terrestrial ecosystem, as well as poverty and health and the education goals. The second pillar of the Green New Deal is low carbon and decentralized energy supply. And it has a lot of impacts on the energy, the infrastructure, the city, and sustainable consumption and production and climate change. The third pillar is innovation in the green industry, and it has lots of impacts on the health, energy, infrastructure, city, SCP, and climate change. I'd like to raise a point that the Green New Deal has a lot of impacts on the social dimensions of the Sustainable Development Goals, but it doesn't show here yet because the Green New Deal policy doesn't have concrete plan for the just transition. I think that is very important, but it is missing. The work needs to be done more. I'd like to, the ambassador mentioned that how we can incorporate private sector. We have lots of the actions and the plans, but without the participation of the private sector, it is meaningless. And to do that, I think the institutional reform and defining future direction is very important. And I think Korea is on track. Last year, the President Moon announced the carbon neutrality by 2050. And there are many legislations backing this vision is under discussion in the National Assembly. I'd like to draw your attention for one act, the Act on Sustainable Society and Green Transformation, because this is the law about the green transformation and the just transition. All of us are aware that the process toward the carbon neutrality affect negatively some people, the regions, and the industry. So the motto of the Sustainable Development Goals, LNOB, no one left behind, is very important and relevant in the concept in this the just transition. So I hope this law can be enacted as soon as possible. The last thing that I want to mention is about the new governance for carbon neutrality and the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development was a president's agenda, but 10 years ago, it was downgraded to the ministry level. Green growth, climate action was also president's agenda, but it downgraded to the prime minister's office level a few years ago. We need the leadership who can show the strong political will, and I hope the current discussion and negotiation in the National Assembly can result in the new governance, which can reflect the full gravity of the carbon neutrality and the sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Chung. Now I'd like to present another question specifically directed to Professor Chung Tae-yong. The question is that among the 17 goals in SDG, what goal do you think is the most serious and needed achieving firstly? I think food problem, hunger is the one. This is the question from audience.
Well, the answer is yes. I think the answer is yes. But if you look the architecture of SDGs carefully, and many panelists, including myself, highlight a lot the SDGs: people, prosperity, planet, partnership, peace. So there are 5 Ps, 6 Ps, and so on. Obviously, if you see the SDG goal number 1 to 5, those goals are directly related to people. Yeah, hunger, health, education, genders, and so on. So why we are pushing these SDG goals? Basically for the prosperity and our environment and so on, but for ourselves, for human beings, and for human systems and human society. So if you ask, among those 17 goals, which goal is the most important? I think all goals are important, but that's why at the beginning of this report, we highlight the interaction among those SDG goals. But obviously, the first 1 to 5 goals that are directly related to people, those are the goals that we have to look at first. I think that's my comment.
Okay, thank you, Professor Chung. There's another question from the audience for Dr. Junichi Fujino-san. The question is, what are the major risks associated with committing to national green growth strategy? I'm not sure whether you have received this question by email earlier. So have you? Can you come up with some question on it, comment on it?
Yeah, thank you very much for the questions. And then, the relationship between green growth and the national policy. Yes, it is quite important to show the strong leadership by the national government to promote the Green New Deal or green recovery. But if the local government side or local business side have no kind of the ability to take the actions, it doesn't have good to the impact. So how we will have yes, it's the a participatory approach, but also kind of participatory actions. We need the kind of the not only the vertical, but also now some of you may know the new management system. It's a tier leadership, and then how to have flat leadership, and then we need the not only the strong policy, but also capacity for the enabling actions. I think this is quite important to having this action. And if we do not have any good capacity, we may have a lot of risks. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So now we have exhausted the questions from the audience, and now we have 10 minutes left for interaction among the panelists. I'd like to come up with some questions for the panelists. So I will go for Dr. Bernard Woos, director from ADB, since we are dealing with many developing countries. And as you have said that developing countries, many of them are actually falling behind, and the achievement is not that good, impressive. And the pandemic made it even more difficult, challenge for them. And when I was a director in the UN SCAP for Environment Development Division, always one of the most important questions from the policymakers of developing country is that we don't have money and we don't have technology. And monies are not sufficient, they don't have a capacity. This has been the constant question from all developing countries. And I'm sure you are trying to address those concerns by developing countries. But I will tell you one of my own story first before you come up with your own story. Whenever I got those questions from the policymakers in developing country, I used to answer that money and technology is not everything. They are necessary, but not sufficient. And the sufficient question left from other than money and technology is policy, especially public policy and government policy. How to make the private sector's investment in climate change or in planet or global commons and for people. How can we make those long-term investment in the people and for the planet to be more profitable? That is the job of the government and the job of the policy. So if the government brings in public policy that can bridge the time gap between the short-term profitability and the long-term sustainability, then the private sector can accelerate their investment and their business plans conducive to the achievement of SDG goals. So I have been emphasizing importance of the public policy as well. Of course, we need money and technology. But what I said was, it is not everything. It is necessary, but it's not sufficient. So I have been emphasizing on the role of the public policy. How do you think? What is your standard answer to those questions from developing country?
Great, thank you very much, Ambassador Chung. Great question, and something we struggle with a lot. So maybe I will have two or three answers to that. The first, I think, comes from some research we've done with UNDP when we're looking at how will the SDGs actually be funded? Where's the money going to come from? And we've looked at domestic sources and international sources. And international sources, public sources like the Asian Development Bank, official assistance, very, very small amount. And the lion's share for the SDGs actually needs to come from a domestic public and domestic private. So that's exactly the kind of sources you're thinking about. So one hand is public policy for domestic resource mobilization. And this includes strengthening tax regimes and increasing the effectiveness and enforcement of tax collection so that the countries in Asia and the Pacific really have the public resources they need to address the SDGs. And the second is what you mentioned, is getting the private sector to focus more on this. So internationally, I think, as I mentioned, there's, in fact, the focus of many parts of the private sector on the Sustainable Development Goals is very sophisticated. So they already have kind of impact investing, impact metrics beyond what some of the countries have. So I think there's already a shift in that direction. And then what countries can do through public policy is to encourage a greater shift there. And one area that I would see as an emphasis is the kind of shift to the digital economy. So I think the COVID-19 pandemic has really underscored this need for the private sector to come into this area. And I think if you look at areas like fintech, I think it can be a win-win where people can get access to capital, they can get banking services, the private sector can make the profit they need on providing that credit and savings and services, and it's a kind of a win-win situation. So those would be the areas that we'd be looking at, domestic resource mobilization and really, directing, helping, catalyzing the private sector to look at those win-win areas. I hope that answered your question. Thank you.
Okay. Any panelists would like any comment on my question or issue? Professor Chung Tae-young?
Not comment, but we have only 5 minutes. So I have one promotion. Yeah, I think as a director of this foundation, as I said, we did this job. I think we published this report. Yeah, the 5-year performance plus what's going on next 10 years. Now, the audience and participant of this GEEF 2021. Please take a look at our report, and we really hope that we want to trigger our collective effort for improving our SDG performance for next 10 years. Obviously, including ADB, IGS, and other partners. I really hope that you can easily download the soft version of the report, and we are very keen to work together with others to improve our SDG performance for next 10 years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Professor Chung Tae-young. Before I close the session, we have only 4 minutes left. Can I come up with one question to Fujino-san? And since Fujino-san is from Japan, the developed country, and the challenge from a developed country might be a little different from the challenges of developing country, which was covered by Bernard Woods. So, in fact, what I have been always expecting from developed countryside is a kind of role model of presenting some of the leadership of pushing the SDG or climate change or carbon neutrality by not only by just a Green New Deal, which is Green New Deal is, as you know, is just a kind of ad hoc financial injection by the government, but it doesn't mention about the private sector's engagement. Green New Deal, one of the limitations of Green New Deal is that it's only a program of the government, and it doesn't talk much about engagement of the private sector. So I have been looking for some of the role model and leadership from developed country, how they are encouraging private sector to be a leader of green programs rather than just by pushed by the government. But how can the private sector can take over the leadership of carbon neutrality, something like this. So is there any kind of movement or any ideas that Japan industry, I'm sure Japan has to push your industry to push for the carbon neutrality. So can you make us any comment on that?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ambassador. It's quite a great challenge, and then now there are several movements from the local private sectors to push the SDGs or climate neutrality, because the local private sector SMEs, they face with the stakeholders, local stakeholders, and the local stakeholders has their own problems or their own issues, and then local private sector try to provide the solution for such as local stakeholders, and then they make a business. So this SDGs, it comes from the problems or challenges in the world towards 2030, and then national government can show the a way or a roadmap, but the real problem, real actions happen on the ground. And so how we will encourage such the local private sectors through the SDGs, because SDGs now it's quite popular, and then such the private sectors who has actions in local side, but they don't have any good name about the activity. Now they can use the word SDGs as their social economic activities. So and then I think in developing countries, the local private sector also face the problems in on the ground. And so how we can encourage such local private sectors, not only the developed country, but in developing country, it's like a bottom of a pyramid. And then now we have many technology, IT technology, many renewable energy. So how we can have good model not only in the developed country, but the developing country. Sometimes developed country, we are so struggle with the current system. So I think SDGs can be not only developing, but the global common world. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Fujino-san. Thank you, Fujino-san and Bernard Woos for joining our session from overseas. And it has been a great pleasure having all the excellent panelists in our session. So thank you very much for your attention. And I appreciate all the participation. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much.